Well, thank you. I think I was invited because people thought I'm related to Mario. I'm not. In this kind of context, I never sure what can I contribute, since the way my own office and the school that I'm the director operates in relation to many of the things doesn't seem to be the most obvious match, and my relation to airports is basically somebody who travels a lot, hates all of them, which I think is an important departure point. I think we all can agree that airports are a problem and a beautiful part of our life at the same time. But in relation to the future and the making and so on, I think there is a couple of questions that comes where I think are important to point out, and I think the idea of panels is that each of us can contribute with something that maybe in the accumulation of those 4 points of view, there's something will come up. So mine is more about to focus on what are the possibilities and how the culture of design is changing. And this, of course, would apply to airport, but it can apply to other things. So they don't relate specifically to that, especially since I will argue, and this is one I think is one of the most problematic issues in relation to airport, is airport remains one of the most closed typologies for any architects or people who have to work in that. It's one of the most difficult because a lot of things are pre-cooked and pre-established when you start to work. And in many, many ways, one could argue that our job is almost like a high, grandiose scale of decoration, really, and not so much to challenge. And I think this is an interesting conversation to have. But in relation to the context of technology and production as we move forward, from my point of view, there has been a whole series of transformations in the last 25 years in terms of how we design and produce things. But the one that I think are the most important in this conversation, I would argue they have to do with the architecture process is collapsing. There is no such thing anymore, even though we still a little bit, but we're moving forward. There's no distinction between design, construction, productions, and fabrication. I think we're getting closer and closer in which all these things will become part of the same operation. It's not happening right now, it may not happen in 5 years, but that's where we're going. And I think in terms of the immediacy that Mario Diaz was mentioning, how we can start to produce, these are going to be very extraordinary factors. The other one is an obvious one, is technology has replaced the notion of craft in the traditional sense, and we are manufacturing more and more of these things. But the last one, which I will point out, which I think is absolutely crucial, is I would argue that image has become the vehicle for the production of form of architecture. And I would argue that most new airports and so on, they operate as three-dimensional immersive images more than buildings. So I want to go back to a little bit of the desire of every architect designer. When we think of an airport, we like to go back, if we could, to the 60s and the romantic thing about flying. That's a beautiful thing. Probably that was the best time with architecture aligned with airports, because that architecture always operates better, from my point of view, when it's attached to a sense of innovation. And of course, flying in the 50s and 60s was not completely new, but it was the first time that it started to become a more massive scale. It's true that still at that time it was a very expensive thing. It was a very small group of people, so everything has an up and a down. So of course it was easier to do something interesting and cool when probably the passenger movement on TWA in 1966 was probably maybe 8,000 people a day, maybe. Right now that number is completely different. That's been said, I never fully understand when we went from the romantic idea of traveling and flying to the move and cuddle concept that seems to be everybody more comfortable today, despite the best efforts. The other thing which I think was mentioned already is the role of technology, and in many, many ways has fixed a lot of the bureaucracy of the traveling, but it hasn't really changed that much the time and the space. One of the things that is interesting for architects and designers to consider is airports are one of the, it's a dream place. You have a captive audience. You have people cannot go anywhere. They're there. It's like the ultimate fantasy for somebody who wants to design an environment. So the question is how the technology that right now is focusing to mostly efficiency can start to become part of the enhancement of experience, and we start to see this today through machine visions and the possibility of new materials. This is some, so we don't need sound. This is some of the work done in the school by the students. I'll show you some of my work too, but part of the notion is there are all these mechanisms in which a column doesn't need to be, can we turn off some of the lights if possible? Also, if people can take a nap if you want. But it's part of the possibility in terms of the sense that a column doesn't need to be just a column can move, a column can rotate. So many of the conventional elements of architecture, they are becoming more and more an opportunity to be challenged, and how we can rethink in these elements as possibilities of dynamic spaces. Again, keeping in mind that we're talking about the captive audiences, we're talking about means of fabrication and production, so the notion of robots, but not only robots in terms of means of production, but also the robots as a possibility of a dynamic architecture. What if these things that Mario was talking about in terms of possibility to regrouping, reorganizing, reestablishing things, what if in the near future we can start to think about the spaces and can be converted and changed, or what happens when the airport is full of people and then when you are flying, maybe your flight is delayed and you 2 a.m. in the airport and nobody there, what happens if we can start to think the possibilities if the space can reconfigure, it can reorganize? What if the idea that right now a certain level of comfort or luxury is mostly reduced to airline clubs, some of these qualities can start to happen. So it's not just to think in technology as a way to build faster, more efficient, but also the idea of technology and the possibilities how to enhance the experience. Because again, as I was saying about the captain world, this is some of the work of other students, the idea of creating worlds, the idea to create elements. This, I will say, clearly have nothing to do with airport per se, but it's much more to do with the frame of mind and where we are today. The world of design is moving into a territory that is not just enough to produce a building or an object, it's to create worlds. What if we start to understand airports as a way to micro worlds or micro cities, and we can change and affect how they perform, how they behave by season, how they behave during the day, and how we can start even think about augmented reality and virtual reality. These are things that they are really moving way faster than we ever anticipated. And these are elements that can start to enhance. For example, we have conversations about securities. Of course, security, one will hope that technology will give us a solution that will move faster, but nevertheless, it's one of the spaces that you spend the most time in an airport. What if those spaces it can become some kind of a proactive? Is a time that can be used something beyond checking your iPhone? What if you can start to be organized in a way that you can receive in your iPhone when will be your queue or your appointment to go through security? What if all the things that we start to see in other things in life, like today you can see people picking the new iPhones and you can check in and go into the Apple store and get your iPhone at 8:33, and 8:33 your new iPhone will be waiting for you there. And of course that it happens inside the Apple branded environment store. Is a whole experience of something. So there is this notion that transportation always relates in which functionality and efficiency seems to be the main thing. I'm showing some of my work, nothing to do per se with airport. I'm just making a case for completely unfunctional, unnecessary formal maneuver, just to illustrate the point. But the idea that every object can start to be interacted. What if each piece of furniture, each piece of cup of coffee, everything can start to be integrated in a way that efficiency is not just an efficiency of functionality, it becomes an efficiency of comfort and efficiency of an experience. If you're going to have to spend, which sometimes it happens, a 24-hour whole day inside a continuum space on airport, this is an interesting idea. Actually, Ben Bradton, who was in the previous panel, and we talk about, and we taught many years ago in a studio about airports in 2004, when JetBlue was really becoming really big. And one of the arguments that we were doing with them was, if you take, at that time, was a Long Beach Airport, take the plane and then land in Kennedy Airport. And technically, yes, you are in two cities in a plane, but technically you were 8 hours inside JetBlue space, between the terminal, the plane, and again. So it's the idea of it, you have an architecture that continues through time and space, even though you're in different, but we tend to think that only in terms of branding or commercialization. We always think in those terms. We don't think in what does it mean in terms of experience and what are the possibilities of that. So I think Devin from TIG is here, and I'm not even sure if I can show this, because this is something that we worked with Alex McDowell with Boeing and TIG for the Customer Experience Center many years ago. I think it has been built for a couple of days. And Devin, please, if I couldn't, tell your lawyers to don't sue me. But I thought with this audience was the only place to show it. We never show it. But the idea was this was a customer experience center for Boeing for basically the CEO of the airline's experience. And Boeing have a really cool idea. It's an interior inside a warehouse in Seattle. But the idea was for them that each CEO will have the experience to go and spend a couple of days, since this is a partnership between the airline and the manufacturer of the planes, to spend time in this space and rethink and re-understand how the relation and how to understand the technology, the quality, and so on. But it was really designed for them to be an immersive experience for this. So even though Boeing will at the end be selling planes to each of these airlines, the idea was for them to spend time together to rethink what was the possibility of design, what was the possibility of the technology, what was the possibility of efficiency, and spend time. So this was the design, and we worked with Alex McDowell and 5D, and Alex was really the leader of the project, and through the content and the media content, our job was to do a physical framing to some of these ideas. These are all the renders of different proposals. So the idea was that you were inside the clouds and you were all the time in airspace, that you were not really in the ground, that the moment that you walked there, and all this will be rebranded by the company that will come. So if it was Qantas, everything will become Burgundy, and if you're working with Emirates, everything will become Gold, and so on. So it was really for them to understand the experience. These are two quick images of the built space that I dragged from my server today. Again, this is the first time I show, and the last time I don't think we can show them because it belongs to Boeing. But again, apologize, and if that, okay, I'll pay the fine. But this is what they built. It's slightly different than what we designed, but it's close enough. And what I'm saying by this is there are a lot of possibilities to rethink. The other element to keep in consideration, and I think Mario referred to that, is we're seeing more and more the crossover between types and notions. So this that it looks like a wild park that we designed for Barcelona actually was a pedestrian bridge, but they needed to operate as a park because this is a part of the town that they couldn't have a park. Or this park in China is not really a park, it's an open office space outdoors. So all this is infused with the latest technology for the people to work outdoors and to be connected to it. So the client didn't, it looked like a park, but it's not really a park. It's an open office space that relates to a couple of warehouses. And all this is ultra security protected and so on. You can get in and out. It's not a public space and so on. But for all intent and purpose, is a park. Of course, I'm not saying that an airport can be a park, but what I'm saying is that the airports can start to take a clue about these strategies in which the notion of there are moments that the typology cannot be break, like the gate, all the infrastructural part. But the other one doesn't need to be always a shopping mall. Doesn't need to be always this ultra commercialized space, which, by the way, I don't know how well they do or not, but every I travel from Terminal 5 with Ben and Gaston, have a beautiful installation, which is really the only cool thing. Everything else is like a shopping mall. It always seems empty. So I'm not even sure that these stores make that money or not. But I'm just saying there is opportunities for us to rethink what is the context of some of these elements, how this can start to operate. And the last thing to wrap it up, since I have a minute and a half, and since Bill Crystal is in this panel, is also the possibilities of the intelligence of materials, as I was referring to earlier. So from flexible solar panels and robotic arms, and the idea that the monocoques can be embedded with multiple layers, or things that can change over time. Again, these are not available right now at an affordable place. It is technology and there is logic that is available. But the question is, if we want to start to establish means of transportation, then we want them to endure, and instead of every 25 or 30 years turning down terminals and building new ones, can we start to think in this and much more like living organisms that can be evolved or mutate or be transformed, and to start to incorporate the biomaterials or materials reconfiguration on technologies in which one could argue that the airport will be always in a permanent state of transformation, which, by the way, seems to be always the place that they are. Every time you fly LAX or Kennedy or London Heathrow or Barajas in Spain, they're always under construction and renovation. It's a permanent state of airport. I don't even remember what was the last time I flew through a big city airport that is not under construction. Kennedy just finished something, and I said, oh, great, and then you go and something else going on again. Same in LAX, which we understand that. And we know that the increase of flying and all those elements in the next 20 years is going to be exponential. So part of the argument is start to think this is a good moment for us, at least for those of us who have a speculative practice or involved in academia, to really rethink this. And I think it starts from the notion of type. It starts with the notion that to really, our culture of design to get involved in something that has been hijacked by only infrastructure and engineering understanding of that, and try to reclaim a much more dynamic interaction between all of them. As I said, I have no solutions to offer. I just have more questions to add to the question that we already have. If I have any solution, I probably will be hired by some airport company to do that, which I don't recommend. But what I'm saying is, I think these are extraordinary opportunities and for the culture of companies and design to produce new partnerships. Because again, this is a captive audience. This is a continuous space that is fairly unique in the world of architectural design. So I think we should take that opportunity and rethink how we can do that. Thank you.